So I want to talk about chapter 5. Chapter 5 is about understanding the water that we swim in. So as white men, we are like a fish in water. If you think about a fish, maybe a goldfish, swimming in the water, and you pull that fish out and say, "How's the water?" What's it going to say? It might say, "What water?" And if it's out of the water flapping around, it might say, "Oh, that water, put me back in." So the fish is the last to understand the concept of water. And, our culture is the water. The culture that we swim in, the dominant culture in the US that white men helped create many years ago and ongoingly as leaders of most institutions and things, even still. And so this is about understanding there is a culture in the US, and that culture equates a lot to what we know of in our firm as US white male culture. And that it's those folks who have come from other places, including women or people of color or others from overseas. They're very aware of the water that we swim in and how to navigate it, just as if we went into Japan as white men would be very focused on learning the culture, or in the Middle East or anywhere. So for us to think we don't have a culture is fairly naive. And the paradox is that you don't understand your culture unless you leave it and step out of that water. So this is about that. One of my mentors and colleagues, Ed Shine, and I just recently wrote a book chapter about this, the traits of white male culture. And we have a lot of overlap in our thinking about it. But one of the things that can happen is that people can assume if you're going to examine a culture, you're trying to critique it or say it's bad. And that's not the case. In my view, white male culture has created a lot of success in corporations in a lot of parts of the country. And any strength can be overused, but that it's inherently not a good or bad. It just has strengths and downsides, just like any culture. So what are some of those strengths and what are some of those traits? And there's a list of them in the chapter that I talk about. The rugged individualism, that sense that I can make it on my own. And that comes from a context for Northern European men who emigrated into the US, being told overseas in Europe what class they were, what religion, wanting to have the freedom to be themselves and to quote unquote go out on the frontier and make a place for themselves. And so that rugged individualist, it got embedded in our Constitution as the Bill of Rights, individual rights, and individuality is one of our strongest traits. Other cultures are more collectivist. They say the nail sticks up, gets hammered down. We really encourage people to speak up and use creativity and individualism. So that is a huge trait. For white men, it means not asking for help, not asking for directions if we're lost driving perhaps, and being tough in a male sense of the way too. A low tolerance of uncertainty, that's a trait that is from that Calvinistic root, as I said in the book chapter, this tendency to think in either or terms, you're good or bad, you're with us or against us, and it makes it harder for us to see the gray area. And in diversity, we want to all of a sudden want the wallet card. We want the 10 things to do and not to do. We don't want this messy confusion of grayness. And we don't get to have that. That we don't know whether to open the door for women or not open the door for women. Different people want different things. Somebody wants to be called black. Somebody wants to be called African American. So this uncertainty we have to actually sit with and leverage, even though we don't want that. And, in your organization, a low tolerance of uncertainty serves you for whether it's processes that you sell or precision items that you make. You want a low tolerance of uncertainty. But around diversity, it's something we have to lean into, the messiness and raggediness of this topic. The third trait that I think of around white male culture is action over reflection, doing over being, this concept of I have value because I'm doing things. I introduce myself by my work. I'm a consultant as opposed to other parts of the world. You're from so-and-so, your parents are so-and-so. And so my identity gets tied up in what I do. And I think I end up taking a problem solving orientation to a lot of things too, because that feels like that's where I add most value. That takes away from the beingness or the connectedness or the relational orientation of being in the here and now with other people, because I only do it to get a task done. We'll come back to that. Another trait, rationality over emotion, and the sense that I get credibility from data. I got to have the data, put my ducks in a row, put it on the PowerPoint, and don't bring emotion, because that takes away from rationality. So again, this sense of either orness, that I'm either rational or emotional, is kind of unique, I think, to white male culture. Other cultures, you don't have that. You can be rational and emotional, and it's not seen as an either or. So sometimes that has us leaving our hearts behind, which can have impact on our partnerships, our relationships, and things. Time is linear, future focused. We're burning daylight. Put a man on the moon in 10 years. We can create the future together. I love that aspect of the rugged individualist, create the future, act, go for it. That served me well growing up. The status and rank part of our culture over connection, having more focus on, where we are in a hierarchy versus closer or farther apart. Deborah Tannen talks about the connectedness between women as something they pay more attention to. And we try to get those connection needs met through bantering, through, smack talk, as one team talked about it and mentioned that. And it's like, so the what then culture emphasizes is actually connecting in a way that gets a lot of things done, and clarity of hierarchy and things. And so the relational orientation is not emphasized unless it's just the minimal relating to get the task done. Other cultures, you sit down and you build connection before you try to work together. So this whole idea that I introduce in this chapter is important about a strength overused can become a weakness, which is a mindset. And so what are my strengths at a cultural level? Whether I get into doing mode instead of being mode, fixing things instead of stopping and understanding and reflecting before I fix something. I can't fix what I don't understand. So the concept of a strength overused is a way to see the culture as not bad. It's got great strengths unless I overuse them. So by all means, pull the rugged individualism and that strong orientation towards doing and fixing and rationality and creating the future, and watch when I overuse those traits. And some of those can be balanced with what I'm introducing in the book as our 8 critical leadership skills. That integrating head and heart, that listening, that sitting in messiness and balancing those paradoxes and things. So those are some of the traits that I think of with white male culture, and women may identify with those traits because, if I go back to the first time I presented those to Shell executives, their first words out of their mouth were, "That's our performance appraisal system." And so it gets embedded as a definition of success, not just for everybody, not just for white men, but for everybody. So, everybody assimilates to that culture. And I might think, as a white guy, I see a pretty diverse group here, and they seem to all be fitting in well. Well, I don't even realize they're assimilating to the culture, because I don't think of it as a culture. I just see it as being a good human, or maybe what a good leader looks like, acts like. And that causes me to have an unconscious bias and think about, how do I mentor people? Do I mentor people that fit into my culture and act like me? Do I use a lens to hire people and promote people that fit into this culture and keep me comfortable? And how much do I hire people that have opposing strengths to that culture that bring a balance? And is that okay? And can I bring some of those traits in myself out? Can I bring out myself, this concept, one of the concepts of, others gain around diversity, but we gain too as white men. One of those big pieces is that we get to see our culture through this process of understanding ourselves and our white maleness. And then we become more choiceful about the culture. We can use it as the strengths allow us to, whether it leads us to being good leaders in certain qualities, and we can step outside of it when it serves us better as a listener or as a relationship builder or connector, a pause and a reflector. So use the cultural strengths and have the freedom to step out of them. And notice when I impose those cultural tenets or assumptions on other people, because they leave a part of themselves at the door that doesn't fit into the culture. And if I say I treat everybody the same, they're saying, yeah, you'll treat me the same as long as I stay in your cultural box and keep you comfortable. And I don't even know that I'm doing that. So a lot to reflect on there in chapter 5. So I think some questions I want to leave you with in reflection around that is, to what degree do I see the culture? To what degree do I identify these traits in the workplace that I'm at? Which ones are really strong there? Which ones, what would other people say? Do other people say they see these traits as well? And again, am I looking at this analysis as somehow they're bad? Because that's not Michael's intent, that's not my intent. And which ones do I overuse that I want to balance in my life? So a lot to think about there, a lot to consider. And, one way to look at examining this unexamined aspect of being white and being male is, do I have a culture? We'll look at another part in another couple chapters, which is, do I not have to think about things others are navigating, which is a way to think about systemic advantage or privilege and stuff. So this is a cultural lens, a multicultural lens. And as you travel the world, you see other cultures and other ways that they are both the same and different than us. And there's an intercultural sensitivity model that we've measured some of our folks on over the years, whether it's been corporate leaders or some of the police. And one of the first steps is denial of difference, minimization of differences, acceptance of differences, and more appreciation of differences. And everybody that's gone through a caucus of the people that we measured have moved up to that scale from denial to minimization and into acceptance. And again, it's back to that sameness difference paradox. Do I tend to only focus on sameness, and or do I see the differences? And so part of it is understanding systemically what is my culture, starting to see that, and how does that play out? Who in the organization makes up the culture, has influence, who's in, who has a voice, who is appreciated, and who gets to make the rules. And you as an insider, as a white male, have the ability to, when you step out of the white male culture and you model being in your heart more, you model being saying I don't know or asking for help, it actually makes it a lot safer for others who may feel like outsiders in the culture, whether it's women or people of color, others, to actually step out of the culture too. And so we as insiders have a lot of power to help expand the culture and give a little more cultural flexibility to it. I once worked with a white male who kind of connected in the way that I guess it would be Al. Al's the heart guy in this group, in this book. Frank is a little bit more of an alpha male. Kind of joked about him being the general, and Joe's the analytical, Lee's the quiet guy, but Al's the heart guy. And one heart guy I worked with, he said, they wanted me to be a leader, but they said you got to be more analytical. I had to try to leave my heart at the door, and he said, I don't want to lead anymore. At one point, he just gave up. And they kept it after him. They said, no, we really want you to be a leader. And he said, okay, I'll do it, but I've got to bring myself. I've got to be myself. I've got to bring my heart. And he modeled a different way to be a leader that others also emulated from that. And that expanded the way of being a leader. So again, what are each at the individual level our strengths that we overuse? And you'll see that in the book chapter where these guys share some of what they think of as their strengths and where that gets them in trouble when they overuse them. So that's how people derail their careers, overusing those traits, but we can do it culturally too. So chapter 6 expands onto this idea of culture. I get into Thomas Kochman's work, which is a fascinating colleague that I met many years ago, who studied black-white styles in conflict. It was one of his books, Corporate Tribalism, with Gene Marvellius, his colleague. And, they looked at some of the differences between Anglo culture and his studies of urban black culture. And truth is signified by a rationality in his study of Anglo culture, and signified by emotion is how truth is signified in his studies of urban black culture. So if you don't know you have a culture and you look at somebody else's behavior and you assume the same thing is driving their behavior that is driving yours, then you're going to misattribute something in that culture. So if somebody's emotional, I might think they're out of control, when that might be true of my culture, but it's not necessarily true of another culture. So I got to understand my culture as well as I understand other cultures. And one of those things is, as we say in the mindset for chapter 6, is to get comfortable with ambiguity, get comfortable with emotion, get more comfortable being uncomfortable. And the raggediness, the messiness, it's not okay to say, I'll have a conversation about race or gender with you as long as you stay calm and as long as we have it rational, and, impose my culture on it. So I need to be able to step out of my culture at times and let people be themselves, to have that experience myself, but also create more of a neutral ground for all of us to have a little more space to share. As I mentioned in that chapter, some people have truth before peace and other people lean into peace before truth. And how can we have a space where all people show up as they need to and really hear each other and lean into each other? So I'm excited about that. As you think about, what are the rules in my workplace? What are the expectations, and what happens when people step outside of them? And what would you change about your culture if you could at work? What would others want to change? What would women want to change? What would people of color want to change? What other part of themselves would they like to bring at work? Those are questions for you to reflect on. Those are questions that can lead to more curiosity and more inquiry when you're connecting with others. So thanks for reviewing chapter 4 and chapter 5 and chapter 6. 4 was the paradoxes, 5 fish and water, and 6 was just a little bit more about ambiguity and turbulence and sitting with that. Next, we're going to explore a little bit more about whiteness and getting into race.